guys, welcome back to my ASMR channel. Today we are going to be reading spooky stories. I have my laptop here and I'm really excited for this one because I'm going to be reading the stories at the same time, so yeah, I'm looking forward to it. I hope you're relaxed and ready for bed. This is either going to keep you awake because it's creepy or put you to sleep. Alright, the first thing I found was a article called My Favorite Short Scary Stories by Zoe Marland, class 12. So I guess she's a senior in high school. Alright, the first one is called Who's in My Bed? A father went to say goodnight to his 7-year-old son, very well knowing that if he didn't, his son would have trouble sleeping. Alright, not me not being able to read my first sentence. Okay. I haven't read aloud in a while. Okay, I'm gonna start over. Who's in my bed? A father went to say goodnight to his 7-year-old son, very well knowing that if he didn't, his son would have trouble sleeping. It was a nightly routine between them. He entered the dimly lit room where his son waited under his blanket. With the first glance, the father could tell there was something unusual about his son tonight, but couldn't put his finger on it. He looked the same, but had a grin that drew from ear to ear. "You okay, buddy?" the father asked. The son nodded, still with the grin, before saying, "Daddy, check for monsters under my bed." The father chuckled a bit before getting on his knees to check, only to satisfy his son. There, under the bed, pale and afraid, was his son, his real son. He whispered, "Daddy, there's someone on my bed." Okay. So one of them is cloning the monster, and one of them is the monster. Alright, I rate that one a 7 out of 10. That was pretty short as well. I want to find a longer one. Let's see. Alright, this next one. Okay, I had some storage issues, but I think I got it figured out. So, the next story that we're going to read is called The Cabin. This one is a little bit longer, but still kind of short. A hiker decided to go on a hike by himself, something he was not very used to. The whole day was normal. Trees and bushes engulfed his surroundings. He enjoyed being outdoors in the mountains. Nothing seemed strange to him. That was until he was making his way back to his car. He figured an 8-hour hike was good enough. The sky was already getting dark and he needed to get back fast. What was odd was how much he didn't recognize the trail back. He began to panic. Night had already taken over, and all he had was a flashlight and no clue on how to get back. He knew it was already too late and too dangerous to keep going through the peerless forest. He began to worry that he would have no shelter for the night when, almost lucky enough, he stumbled across a broke-down cabin. It was dark and seemed like no one had visited in years, but he knew it was the only place where he could rest until daylight, especially since his flashlight was running out of battery. He knocked on the door a few times, but no one answered, so he let himself in, where, strangely enough, a perfect bed fitted for one person awaited him in the corner. He knew that if the owner came back, he could explain himself. He was sure that the owner wouldn't mind, or was even probably dead, so he went ahead and got himself comfortable in bed. As he tried to sleep, he couldn't ignore the collection of paintings around the room, portraits of strange-looking people all peering at him, each wearing a smile that sent chills up his spine. Not too long after, his exhaustion from the hike got the best of him, and he was able to ignore the faces. The next morning, he got up early and was shocked to see that there were no paintings around the room, but windows. That one's pretty good. That's creepy. That was probably an 8 out of 10. Well, that's a bit generous. We'll say 7 out of 10. Okay, what is the next spooky story? Alright, this one's pretty short. White with red. A man just moved into an apartment and heads to the receptionist to get his keys. The receptionist gave him the key with a smile, but warns him not to disturb the door with no number on his floor. He wondered why, but didn't bother to ask. He was too busy with his new apartment to care. After he finished unpacking, he began to get curious. He questioned why the receptionist would warn him of such things, and so he stepped out of his apartment to check the door with no number. He tried the doorknob first, but it was locked, so instead he got onto his knees and peeked through the keyhole. The apartment he was looking into was empty. His eyes scanned the whole place before stopping at a woman standing face against a wall in the corner. He noticed her pale skin and long black hair before stepping back, suddenly feeling perverted in a way for invading someone else's privacy. He brushed it off, assuming she was someone that did not want to be disturbed. The next day, he got more curious about the women and eventually went back, straight away getting onto his knees. He peeked through the keyhole and saw all red. He assumed that the pale woman must have caught him peeking the last time and covered the hole with something red. He left the door alone and instead went down to the receptionist to ask her questions. The receptionist sighed and asked, "You looked through the keyhole, didn't you?" He admitted it, and so she felt obligated to tell him the story. She told him that a couple used to live in that apartment a long time ago, but the husband went crazy and killed his wife. However, this couple wasn't normal. They had pale skin, black hair, and red eyes. Okay, I guess that's the end of the story, but I'm just thinking, if he killed the wife, why was the wife alive then? And then I guess the red eyes, that was probably him looking in the door. The eye was staring right at him. But I think that one was kind of bad. I'm gonna rate that like a 5 out of 10. I don't know about you guys. Let's find a longer story. Do we want to do something true or something fiction? These are all so short. Alright, we made it to Cora. So, but these are short. scary stories. Wait, I have an idea. I'm probably gonna have to edit this. Alright, I found a website that has like good stories. They're like original Halloween stories. The title is Axe Murder Hollow. Susan and Ned were driving through a wooded, empty section of the highway. Lightning flashed, thunder roared, the sky went dark into the torrential downpour. "We'd better stop," said Susan. Ned nodded his head in agreement. He stepped on the brake, and suddenly the car started to slide on the slick pavement. They plunged off the road and slid to a halt at the bottom of an incline. Pale and shaking, Ned quickly turned to check if Susan was all right. When she nodded, Ned relaxed and looked through the rain-soaked windows. "I'm going to see how bad it is," he told Susan, and went out into the storm. She saw his blurry figure in the headlight, walking around the front of the car. A moment later, he jumped in beside her, soaking wet. "The car's not badly damaged, but we're wheel-deep in mud," he said. "I'm gonna have to go for help." Susan swallowed nervously. There would be no quick rescue here. He told her to turn off the headlights and lock the doors until he returned. Axe Murder Hollow. Although Ned hadn't said the name out loud, they both knew what he had been thinking when he told her to lock the car. This was the place where a man had once taken an axe and hacked his wife to death in a jealous rage over an alleged affair. Supposedly, the axe-wielding spirit of the husband continued to haunt this section of the road. Outside the car, Susan heard a shriek, a loud thump, and a strange gurgling noise, but she couldn't see anything in the darkness. Frightened, she shrank down into her seat. She sat in silence for a while, and then she noticed another sound. Bump, bump, bump. It was a soft sound, like something being blown by the wind. Suddenly, the car was illuminated by a bright light. An official-sounding voice told her to get out of the car. Ned must have found a police officer. Susan unlocked the door and stepped out of the car. As her eyes adjusted to the bright light, she saw it. Hanging by its feet from the tree next to the car was the dead body of Ned. His bloody throat had been cut so deeply that he was nearly decapitated. The wind sung his corpse back and forth so that it thumped against the tree. Bump, bump, bump. Susan screamed and ran toward the voice and the light. As she drew close, she realized the light was not coming from a flashlight. Standing there was the glowing figure of a man with a smile on his face and a large, solid, indefinitely real axe in his hands. She backed away from the glowing figure until she bumped into the car. "Playing around when my back was turned," the ghost whispered, stroking the sharp blade of the axe with his fingers. "You've been very naughty." The last thing she saw was the glint of the axe blade in the eerie, incandescent light. Alright, that was a good one. That was like an OG Halloween story. I rate that an 8 out of 10. Let's see what else there is. This one's a good website. This one is called Dispatched. A South Carolina ghost story. There was something odd in the tone of the dispatcher's voice when he came, or when he called to tell me maybe if I could read right. Okay. There was something odd in the tone of the dispatcher's voice when he called to tell me a person needed picking up at Bramlett Road late one summer night in 1947. I shuddered when I heard the name of the street. I did not want to go anywhere near that area, especially at midnight. But I drove a yellow cab, and it was my job to pick up a call when it came. So I swallowed and headed toward Bramlett Road in the slaughter yards. I'd been out of town when the incident happened. I called it an incident, but it was a murder, plain and not so simple. A fellow name of Brown, who drove a cab with our company, was robbed and stabbed to death in his cab. Next day, a man named Willie Earl was picked up by the police the very next day and put in jail for the crime, though he denied doing it. Then, a bunch of hotheads who drove cabs for our company gathered together, passed around a bottle of whiskey, and talking about getting the fellow who'd stabbed Brown. One of the men went and borrowed a shotgun, and the mob drove to the jail, grabbed Earl, and threw him in the back of one of the cabs. The hotheads took him to the slaughter yards, and they dragged Earl forcibly from the cab and started beating him. A man pulled a knife and waded to the mob with it, and Earl shouted, "Lord, you've killed me." That's when the fellow with the shotgun put a bullet in his head, reloaded, and shot him twice more. When the mob was sure he was dead, they climbed back into their separate cabs and fanned out, each heading back to the city by a different route. Eventually, word got out and 31 fellows were arrested for the crime, but they were all acquitted. I can't read that word right now. Acquitted. Anyways, by a jury of their peers. After the incident, the slaughterhouse section of Bramlett Road got a bad reputation. No one in the cab company much liked driving there, especially at night. Folks claimed it was haunted by the ghost of Willie Earl. I shivered as I pulled onto Bramlett Road and slowed down to look for my passenger. No one was there. I parked the cab and got out to have a quick smoke while I waited. All at once, the temperature around me plummeted. I froze in place, suddenly terrified, as someone moaned in terror from the other side of the road. The sound scraped my nerves raw. I could hear the unmistakable thud of hammering fists, and the darkness was filled with swirling black silhouettes pounding on something or someone. I fumbled for the icy cold door handle as a man shouted agony, "Lord, you've killed me." I threw myself into the cab as a gun exploded, cutting off the man's cries. The shot was swiftly followed by two more. I squealed the tires as I spun the cab around. A tall, battered figure that glowed just enough for me to see its lolling head, the blood-stained dead features, the knife-torn clothes blocked the road in front of me. I gasped, floored the gas pedal, and swerved around it, heart hammering so hard it hurt my ribs. I was still trembling when I slammed into the office a few minutes later and told the dispatcher I was quitting. Then I grabbed my things and headed for home. Lickety-split. Lickety-split. I haven't heard that in forever. There was no way I was going to Bramlett Road ever again, and I never did. Mid. That was mid as a brick. Sorry guys, I always have an opinion. Let's see what we should read next. This one sounds like an original Halloween story. It's called Jack-o'-lantern. After a long day of unlucky hunting, I I found myself stuck in the middle of the marshlands for the night, without a flashlight or a lantern to guide my stumbling steps. So I settled beside a fallen log to rest until daylight. As I tossed and turned, I recalled the story my great-uncle told me about a ghost that haunted the marshlands. There was once a man named Jack who was a nasty fellow. He beat his wife and kids and was an all-around bad chap. Jack got worse and worse as the years rolled by, but finally Jack's body got so wore out that he died. He went up to heaven, but St. Peter refused to let such a wretched fellow in. Then he went to hell, but the devil barred the door as soon as he saw Jack coming and wouldn't let him enter. "Go away and don't come back," the devil told Jack. "How am I supposed to get back into the dark?" Jack grumbled. "Give me a lantern." So the devil threw a chunk of molten fire out to Jack, who took it for his lantern and went back to Earth, where he wanders forever through the swamps and marshlands of the earth, a bitter spirit whose only delight was in luring the unwary to their doom with his lamp. At this juncture in my musings, I happened to look out over the marshes and noticed a blinking light in the fog. "Is that you, Jack-o'-lantern?" I called. "Jack, Jack, Jack, Jack," a voice whispered back. I was seriously spooked. I clutched my gun to my chest, the hairs on my arms standing on end. Had that been an echo of my voice, or was someone out there? "Who's there?" I shouted, trying to sound brave and menacing. I waved my gun around. "Show yourself at once." "Jack, Jack, Jack, Jack." The voice hissed from a completely different section of the swamp. A light blinked on and then off, on and then off. Shudders ran up my spine at the sound of that ghastly voice coming from nowhere. I huddled up against the log, wanting something firm at my back. Suddenly, the story of the jack-o'-lantern did not seem so funny. My heart was pounding so hard it made my chest hurt. I strained my ears in the silence that fell over the swamp. "Jack, Jack, 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 Jack," the voice hissed from somewhere to my left this time. The light blinked on, off, on, off. I counted 10 heartbeats this time before it went off. The voice sounded closer. I held very still, my instincts screaming at me to hold my breath and not to move until the minutes had passed. The voice came again, far off to the right. "Jack, Jack, Jack," it hissed. The light came on, off, off. "It's moving away," I thought, relaxing just a bit, feeling safer. There was a long, long silence. Nothing stirred, not the wind in the grass, nor the frogs or turtles in the water, not the crickets or night insects. "Jack, Jack, Jack," the voice hissed softly right in my ear, and I looked up into the glowing red eyes and twisted face of the jack-o'-lantern. I screamed and lashed out at it with my gun. I ran a few steps, tripped and fell over, knocking my head on a sharp stone. For a moment I saw stars, and I felt blood pouring from my scalp. But the jack-o'-lantern was right behind me. I had to get away. I rolled and fell into a deep pool. I plunged underneath the water, flailing desperately against rope-like grasses that tried to keep me down. My head finally burst out of the water, and I gasped desperately for air, treading water as best I could with my trembling limbs and aching head. I heard the creature laugh in the mist. "Jack, Jack, Jack," the voice hissed grotesque face and red eyes of the jack-o'-lantern loomed out of the mist before my petrified gaze. My head started to swim with pain from my bleeding skull. The evil face above me, lit by its bright light, whirled around and around, growing dimmer as my eyes started to glaze. I was vaguely aware that I should keep swimming, keep trying to make my way to the edge of the pool, but the effort was too much for my suddenly heavy limbs. I barely noticed myself plunging down and down into the watery depths of the pool, too stunned by my injury to fight my way to the surface a second time. Then there was only darkness and silence and a voice hissing in cold triumph. Jack, Jack, Jack. That was the end of that one. That one was pretty good, I would say. Jack-o'-lantern, jack-o'-lantern. Ooh, okay, let's do this one. The Face. The Face. Retold by S.E. Schlosser. I need a drink of my drink, but I can't open it with one hand. Well, okay, that's too much work. Maybe I can do this. Alright. The Face by S.E. Schlosser. The medical student toppled onto Love as soon as he set his eyes on Sheila, the beautiful new transfer student. She had masses of long black hair and eyelashes so long they got tangled in her curls when she leaned over her desk. The medical student had a withdrawn nature, though not by inclination. He learned the hard way that people avoided him when they heard about his insane father locked away in an asylum. But he had to overcome his his something nature or risk losing Sheila to one of the other fellows that panted after her. So the medical student volunteered to tutor her, Sheila, in one of her classes. Okay, there's some typos in here. After that, it was easy. Sheila toppled into love, or maybe I just can't read. After that, it was easy. Sheila toppled down to love with the medical student as madly as he was in love with her. They went everywhere together, hardly bearing to part for classes. The medical student lived in a bubble. The medical student lived in a bubble of joy until the day he saw Sheila speaking to a good-looking fellow who lived in the same dorm. They were laughing together over something one of the professors had said in history class, and a shaft of sheer jealousy pierced the medical student's gut. How dare she laugh with another man? Okay, what does that mean? He confronted his Sheila with her perceived trespass, and she stared at him incredulously. "You're crazy," she said. He winced, reminded of his father, and shouted insults at Sheila until she stalked off in a rage. They made up over dinner, and things were fine for a while, until the medical student saw Sheila borrow a pen from a handsome blonde fellow at the library. That set him off again. They hissed angry words at each other until the librarian kicked them out. The medical student huddled onto the narrow bed in his dorm room until black anger gave way to common sense. He called Sheila and apologized. She accepted his apology, and they are back together. The medical student, who was scheduled to take Sheila to a local dance on Friday night, so he rushed to the dorm to dress in his best. As he turned to leave, the medical student noticed off for a moment to ask red-haired fellow from one of her art classes about an assignment that was due the next day. The medical student was instantly filled with a gut-gnawing jealousy. When Sheila rejoined him, he hustled her upstairs to his room and shouted, "You flirt with every man you meet, you tramp." "You are crazy," Sheila shouted back, stark raving mad. The boyfriend saw red. "Don't call me mad," he said, his hand groping for the loose scalpel in his medical bag on the desk. When the mist cleared from his eyes, Sheila lay dead at his feet, her throat cut from ear to ear. The whole room was covered with red gore, and her masses of black hair lay in a pool of steaming blood. The medical student's brain went into overdrive. Hide the body, clean up the blood, invent an alibi. But first, he stared at the dead girl he had loved so much. Then he knelt beside the body and slowly cut off her face. He wrapped the face carefully in plastic before putting it in his desk drawer. This man is insane. Carry on, okay. Then he cleaned up the blood and hid the body in a tunnel near the laundry room. The next morning, the medical student told his roommate Sheila had broken up with him and had gone home in a snit without finishing her classes. The roommate accepted the story without question and didn't appear to notice the way the medical student peered obsessively inside his desk drawer. The medical student finally tore himself away Sheila's face to attend his 11 o'clock class. When he returned at lunchtime, he found his roommate leaning out the open window, looking ill. "I think I have the flu. I'd best run to the pharmacy and pick up something for it," the roommate said when he came in. "Want me to take a look?" the medical student asked, reaching for his bag. His roommate turned white. "No, thank you, don't bother," he gasped, practically running from the room. The medical student shrugged in exasperation, peered into the drawer at Sheila's face, and settled down to work on a paper he had due next week. Next downstairs, his roommate was on the phone with the police. The medical student went ballistic when the police came with a warrant to arrest him. They manhandled him out of his chair while a grim-faced officer took a look inside the desk drawer. When he saw the dead girl's face, the officer swore violently and vomited on the floor. The medical student was placed in the asylum with his father, who was locked away in a padded room next door. I forgot his father was also insane. Every day, while his estranged father tried to kill his attendants, the bereft boyfriend wept and stared out the window, seeing Shaylee's lovely face in the branches of a nearby tree. The face seemed to sway to the rhythm of his father's fists as his insane parent pounded and pounded at the walls. Back in the dorm, the ghost of a young girl in blood-stained dress still floats along the hallways, searching for her face. That one was pretty crazy. Damn. Well, if you're looking for spooky, there's a spooky story for you. Let's see, what else? Let's do this one called Black Magic. Black Magic. Mad Henry was a hermit who lived alone in a discreet mansion at the edge of town. Rumors were rife about the wild-eyed man. Some folks said that he was a magician who called upon the powers of darkness to wreak havoc upon his neighbors. Others called him a mad doctor who could restore life to foul corpses from the local cemetery. No respectable citizen in town had anything to do with Mad Henry. Poor Mad Henry. Okay. Then one year, a new family moved to town with a lovely daughter, Rachel, who caught Mad Henry's eye. He showered the maiden with gifts, goblets of pure gold, necklaces of pearl, and a pot of daisies that never dropped a single petal. Despite the gifts, Rachel fell in love with another, Geoffrey. We're just gonna call him Jeffrey. A handsome young man had just come home from university. A week after meeting, they eloped, leaving behind a stunned, mad Henry. When Rachel and Jeffrey returned from the elopement, they threw a big ball and invited everyone in town. While Rachel was waltzing with her father, she heard a clap of thunder. Lightning flashed again and again. Suddenly, the double doors blew open and a breeze rolled in, bringing with it the smell of dead, decaying things. Mad Henry loomed in the doorway, pulpus gleaming red with anger. He was followed by the grotesque figures of the dead, who came marching 2 by 2 into the room. Their eye sockets glowed with blue fire as they surrounded the room. 2 of the corpses captured Jeffrey and threw him down at the feet of their lord. Red eyes gleaming, Mad Henry drew a silver-bladed knife and casually cut the bridegroom's throat from ear to ear. Rachel screamed and ran forward, pushing the foul, stinking corpses of the dead, and flung herself upon her dying husband. "Kill us both," she cried desperately. But Mad Henry plucked the lass out of the pool of blood surrounding her dead husband and carried her out onto the thundering night. Behind him, the army of the dead turned from the grisly scene and followed their master. The sounds of thunder and lightning faded away as the alchemist and his dead companions disappeared into the dark night. Jeffrey's father and Rachel's father gathered a small mob and followed the evil hermit, intent upon saving Rachel. When they searched Mad Henry's house, they found it completely empty save for a light, which shone from a series of mysterious globes that bobbed near the ceiling of each room. Mad Henry had vanished. Search parties scoured the countryside for days but turned up nothing. Jeffrey was buried in the local cemetery, and the dance hall was torn down. No one in town spoke about what had happened, and no one dared imagine what had become of poor Rachel. A year to the day after the ball, a timid knock sounded upon the door of Rachel's parents' home. When her father opened, he saw a gaunt, gray figure on the stoop. Her eyes were dull with exhaustion and pain. It was Rachel. Her tongue had been cut out so she couldn't speak. But when she produced a knife from her tattered garments, the knife with the silver blade that they had last seen in the hands of Mad Henry, the gleam of satisfaction in Rachel's eyes told them that the streaks of blood that coated the knife were those of Mad Henry. That night, Rachel died in her sleep with a peaceful smile upon her shaved face. So she killed that man. She killed Mad Henry. As she should. Mad Henry. Alright. Which one should we do next? We could do Ghost in the Hallway. Yeah, let's do Ghost in the Alleyway. Alright. Rumors were rife about the alleyway behind the tavern. It was haunted, folks said. Haunted by the ghost of a young girl who had been found murdered in that self-same passage. People avoided the small street after dark, for the spirit was said to be a vengeful one. Of course, no one could name anyone whom the ghost had actually killed, but the tales were enough to keep people away from the alley at night. Fortunately for the owners of the tavern that backed onto the alley, their front door faced a well-lit road, and so business was not slack. Then one night, while the tavern was full of drinkers, a nasty character named O'Hare wandered into the bar. Women and children were not safe in his presence, but especially not women. After O'Hare had consumed far too much alcohol, he suddenly announced to the bar that he'd seen a pretty young beautiful young girl. Everyone in their bar looked down at their glasses as he stumbled onto his feet. No one made a move to stop him, and there was a quiet air of he deserves what's coming to him about the bar as O'Hare left the building. It's just too bad that there isn't really a ghost, though the bartender, setting down the shining glass and picking up another one to polish. O'Hare sorely needed a lesson in human kindness and respect for others. At that moment, a horrible scream came from the alley. Everyone in the tavern looked up in shock and fear. Had there really been a ghost out there? Or was O'Hare up to his old tricks and even now, ghosting one of their women folk? The men leapt onto their feet and raced to the back door of the tavern. Pouring out into the street, they were met by an unnatural cold, and their eyes were dazzled by a blaze of light. The bartender thrust his way to the front of the crowd and saw the body of O'Hare lying in a pool of bright white light. His throat had been torn to pieces, and blood was spilling out into the gushes. Above him hovered the semi-transparent figure of a young girl, her eyes gleaming with red fire, her mouth covered with blood. She glared down at O'Hare and then turned to look at the crowd. The specter licked the blood from her lips, threw up thoughtfully, her eyes on the bartender's neck. Then she vanished, taking the light with her. At their feet, O'Hare gasped out his last breath and died. The local authorities were summoned to deal with the body of O'Hare. Though skeptical at first, they were finally convinced, since there had been so many eyewitnesses who had seen the ghost hovering over the dying man. The bartender resigned his position the next morning and took the job across town. The memory of the ghost's hungry stare at his neck, prompting him to look elsewhere for employment. That was pretty good. The ghost got her revenge. So, go her. How many more do you want to do? It's been 40 minutes. Maybe I'll do an hour. Alright. We could do Bloody Mary. Expert from Spooky, Pennsylvania. Bloody Mary. Alright. Okay, actually, I just got another storage alert. So I'm going to post this video and then make another video like this because I had fun reading these stories to you guys.